next thing would be the barrel. A good note about it is the materials that the barrels are made out of. Most, if not all, airsoft gun stock barrels are brass. It's just an easy material to get a hold of, and it's an easy material to machine. Problem with it is they're a little bit more subject to the elements. They corrode. Look, I made it to level 11. They corrode a little faster. You can just, when they get exposed to water, if you don't take care of your guns, if you ever get your airsoft gun wet, dry it off. Seriously, your parts are gonna, if you have metal parts, they will rust, they will corrode, and maybe if you don't care, that's fine. But if you do care, yeah, it's gonna do it quick. So dry off your guns. They also make, oh, and then the G&G guns, I believe all of them, including the Raiders and such that use 400 FPS, all use their own specific aluminum barrels with a matte finish. And for a gun that that's just recreational, it's designed to be the minimum standard when it comes to airsoft for performance-wise. But when it comes to the quality of parts, they typically lack, personally, on the barrel. It's just what holds the BB to shoot it far. That's about it. So there's that. Most aftermarket barrels you're looking at are steel and aluminum. There is one thing about it. Aluminum is typically cheaper. The problem is it's more subject to the vibrations from your gun. When it just, the vibrations from the motor, from the gears turning, and the impact of the piston on the cylinder head, pardon me. So if you want a more consistent shot with less variance, go steel. There's 3 typical lengths if you're doing the M4 family. 275 to 285 is typically that CQB-R style of M4 where the flash hider is right at the end of the front sight. You can typically look up your stats of your gun from your purchaser, which is probably eVeg or SFGI, but you can also go to the manufacturer's website and they usually have stats available for you to look at. Then the next up is your standard M4 length, 363 millimeters. That really doesn't change. And then if you're using this in a CQB field, I don't know why, it's kind of cumbersome, but M16 length is pretty much always 509 millimeters in length. Next note I have on here is a lot of the whole point of getting a better barrel is to increase your consistency of shot. So that's typically going from a standard bore barrel to standard bore barrel to a tight bore barrel, not a wide bore barrel. Tight bore barrels are typically 603 all the way down to 601 in inner diameter. Standard bore for a stock barrel is typically 605 to 608. It all depends on your brand. There we go. I personally do not believe you should ever touch a 601 barrel because I doubt you're going to buy the expensive BBs that actually fit in this barrel, so go 603. You'll have a much more consistent FPS, which means you'll have a more consistent shot. What I got here, one special note I have is for these brands is these first few are actually from Brill Armory. He does supply a decent quality barrel, and the 3 brands I got on here is the ZCI barrels. Nope, there is 602. I've heard good things from the 602 ZCI barrels. I would still buy better BBs than the garbage Crosman stuff that some of you kiddies are throwing down on the field. There's just no quality control with them, as well as like TSD BBs and Ugh, whatever any of the other garbage ones are. This thing's full of ratatas. Next up would be the Prometheus barrels. Little pricey, but you can get them in different lengths and then still stick with the 603 bore. Also with these barrels, there will be different lengths that may not match the CQB or even the standard rifleman. So what you want to do is you can go slightly lower. Say you have a CQBR and it's using a 280 barrel millimeter. You can use a 270 or a 260. These are millimeters. You gotta think about this. It's not inches or centimeters, it's millimeters. It's not a whole lot if you think about it. I mean, if you want to do the math, you can just take the 10 millimeters and do a division and get the percent of barrel that you've just lost. But that's really more affecting your FPS ratio with your cylinder type. And it's not going to be a whole ton. If you shorten it, you might get a little bit of an FPS boost. You might not. It all depends on the quality of the air seal inside the gun. So there's that, and then there's also the PDI barrels. Most of them are actually standard bore, but it's a better polish, so you get a longer living barrel with a better polish so that the BBs can ride. Because the way it's working is it's hitting the bucking, and then it's creating backspin, and then that backspin kind of rides along the walls of your barrel. So the smoother it is, the better that rolling is, and so the better the backspin is, and the longer that backspin will be. It won't be hindered. So there's that. There's a fourth one on there, Retro Arms. Retro Arms typically is proprietary, honestly. Most people who do a Retro Arms parts are doing almost 100% Retro Arms parts, unless they are willing to commit to custom modding the parts, mix matching brands so that they work. So that's just the few notes from Bill. One thing I've noticed from Evike is modify. They prefer to send out a hybrid style barrel. Typically these need a modify hybrid bucking as well, so I would advise against them personally, just because of the cost. I haven't heard bad performance, but it's because of that cost factor where you need to use a specific barrel with a specific bucking that it doesn't allow for the flexibility in your price range. So for the readily available, Mad Bull, they have a Black Python series, which is an aluminum barrel. Comes in a lot of different lengths. They come 603. You can get the higher tier version, which is made out of 7075 aluminum, which is aircraft grade, so it'll last forever. The problem with it is those barrels come in 601. And like I said, I'd stay away from 601 because I doubt any of you intro people are going to be using expensive BBs. It's a hobby first, and then for some people it's a sport. So, and then Mad Bull also came out with Mad Bull steel barrels. I have one. I really enjoy it. It's very consistent, but it's not any more special than these other brands I'm going to mention. Lonix has their 603 barrels. They come in different lengths, and they're also steel. Same with the Matrix barrels. That's just the name that they give to off-brand companies that they're not a major factor in their sales, so they just put it under the Matrix brand. You'll notice that, and then you'll get the stuff in the mail and it'll say this weird company, and you're like, oh, okay. Because I've had it where I bought Matrix stuff and it was actually SHS or APS. So, and then finally they also, Evike Airsoft GI also provide Prometheus products as well. but that's up in price. I would stay away from it just cause those are like $50 barrels. On top of that, you're gonna get enticed because Umbrella Armory decided to get a contract. Well, not decided. They were given a contract so that they could they had a pardon me. They were able to make a deal with Evike so that they could provide custom R-hopped barrels for Evike to sell. And they're good. I've heard nothing but good things about them. But again, it's a very high-tier product for intro people, and you're not probably buying the right BBs for it. So I wouldn't invest that much money. The other part of it is, if your gun's only $130, $150 and you just bought $75 worth of barrel, just the barrel and the hop, plus you need all the other specific hop stuff, you've pretty much just spent half the gun. Half the gun's value now is just in that part, literally. So for an intro person, that's dumb. Okay. Next, for the intro parts, will be your connector for your battery. Most people don't like to think about this, but it's kind of important to do. Almost all stock guns come with something called a Tamiya connector. It's the little plastic connector you connect your batteries to. These typically are cheap, and they fail. And I don't really care for them. Yeah, so I would replace them with something called a Dean's connector. And you can type this into Google. You can look them up on Amazon. They're cheap, and they're easy to set up. Anybody who knows how to do soldering can do it for you. A lot of places that do recreational airsoft and have a pro shop, so to say, have a tech that is able to usually do soldering, and they'll probably have a service to charge you for it. But it's a good idea, and I don't even limit that to the type of battery you're using, which I'll talk about. The trigger response is improved dramatically, and the health of your gun and battery will also be represented by that change. I also advise most of your guns are going to come, if they do come with a battery, typically it's an 8.4 volt nickel metal hydride battery, or NIM. I advise going to a 9.6. It's not going to damage anything, and you can still use it. You can still use the same charger you got to charge that battery. You'll get a slight rate of fire increase. Trigger response will be up. It's just more voltage running the system. Okay. And if you're feeling a little adventurous, guns these days are built a little better. So I am heavily approval of using a 7.4 LiPo in a lot of these stock guns. It's typically the cheaper guns that can't handle them because they use cheaper motors and wiring, and they don't like using proper internals that last forever. Anybody who owns like a G&G combat machine, ICS, M4, let's see, what else is there? JG, Echo 1, APS. I've trusted APS before, at least from an electrical standpoint. Those introductory guns, I would heavily advise switching over to a 7.4 volt lithium polymer or LiPo battery. I don't advise going over 35C rating. And then the Ma's the Ma. So, if you want to learn about that stuff, ask me questions in the comments below. That would help me out a lot. Also, it'll pop up in the podcast that we do, the Cerberus podcast, where I ask my teammates to help me out answering a lot of airsoft questions and get their opinions on different things, because they're all well-informed individuals. So, another part about the connectors is front and rear wired guns. I personally prefer rear wired guns because if you want to do regular maintenance on your gun, which you should, and make sure you're... I mean, I'm a tech, so I like doing regular maintenance on my guns. Front wire just gets kind of messy every now and again. You got intermediate connectors between the connector for your battery and your gun. So you got to separate that stuff, and it just gets messy. I prefer rear-wired guns. I also prefer full stocks, because then you can have giant batteries in there, and they're not visible, but your gun will last for hours, if not days, because you're only playing for like between 30 and an hour at a time. Usually it's even less than that. So I would say rear, but if you do front wire, get a PEQ box. A lot of airsoft guns these days, especially with M4s, they're hiding the batteries inside the front handguard, which is fine. With a LiPo, it's a little easier with putting in the handguard. But you can also get a PEQ box, and they have NIM PEQs, but there's a lot more LiPo PEQs. If you have trouble finding them, you can also go on to Shapeways, which is a 3D printing site that people have made PEQ designs that you can put whatever battery in them, and they give you the dimensions, and then you can go to a battery site like... I don't typically like getting batteries off e-bike and Airsoft GI. I prefer going to like Hobby King, where they've supplied RC cars for years with different batteries, different LiPos, different sizes and shapes. Just go there, type in what you need, and you'll find a plethora of stuff. And you might even find it pre-set up with Deans, too. So. And then, I would say finally, would be your motor, if you want to make your gun last forever. Typically, most intro guns have a motor that just passes functioning. G&G, typically, I don't care for their motor. It just feels weak. The response isn't that strong, and you're losing efficiency out of the power you're trying to draw from your battery. So you can potentially be harming your battery by having poor connectivity through your motor. And then even then, you're not even getting the full efficiency from that, too, with your rate of fire, so... Man, I'm just killing these Pokemon. Anyway, there is a difference. There's three types. There's high-speed motors, there are high-torque motors, and then there's motors considered level 13. Sweet. And then there are Magnum motors, is usually what they're called. They're just high speed and torque. So typically those ones can run a little hot, literally. There's a lot of current going through them, so they store more energy while transferring it, therefore creating heat. If you ever use semi-auto a lot on your gun, you'll notice that your grip heats up a lot hotter than just your hand holding onto it. So another note about the stats is RPMs and TPA. RPMs references how fast the pinion gear on the head of the motor is spinning. Just basically, more RPMs means faster motor. So typically, high-speed motors will have higher RPMs than high-torque motors. Also, a relationship is typically TPA is in reference to the motor shaft itself and its rotation in relationship to its magnets that it has. I'm not going to explain more than that because it's a lot of technical jargon that a lot of you younger guys who may be listening and paying attention don't know. So, and then there's opinions on what goes into a good torque motor versus a speed motor when it regards to high and low TPA. So, again, I don't want to get into it. But if you do, leave a comment and I'll get into it. So, but back to that, for brands, I have APS, which I'm kind of skeptical on because they do make guns with their own motor, and like I said, usually stock guns aren't that great. So, Echo 1, they make a decent enough motor. It's not gonna push anything really. It's gonna perform, and it's gonna perform for a long time. GMP, they have their motors. They sell them individually. They have the typical ones, the M120, which comes in a lot of their half-decent guns. Their mid-tier range, where it's pushing 400 FPS. The 120, I believe, references their M120 spring that's in their gearbox for that 400 FPS. And then they have a 140, so it's just for a higher spring tension provided through GMP's spring tension. And then you can get the e-bike motors. I've heard they're decent enough. They have a high-speed motor and a high-torque motor. One's like Sonic and one's like Godzilla or something. And then even then, I think they have extreme versions of those too. So you got those. Those are a little more pricey. Then you got the Lonex motors. They are a... Wow. Way to go. I totally wasn't paying attention. What is this? Oh, okay. Man, I gotta pay attention. It is a decent motor. It will have great connectivity, and they have multiple models for you to pick from. The thing I've noticed is that their magnets are not as strong as some other brands that have just as good a performance with better magnets. So in comparison, I would, for price-wise, choose an ASG motor. There's a plethora more of different motors you can choose from when it comes to their RPMs and TPAs. And they're made out of quality parts. The bodies themselves are CNC'd aluminum. And they're great to just drop in. They're good to drop into any stock gun, really. And then after that's the Matrix ones. Those have been around for a while. They have the Matrix. They have the Matrix Blue, the Matrix Standard, and the Matrix Red. They're really strong, and they perform well. The problem I have is they tend to overheat, and that's just because they're made with cheaper materials on their magnets. I don't think the wiring on them is done. They could have better wire wrapping done on the magnets inside them, and they would perform better, is my opinion. But anyway, well, I hope this information helped out a lot of you younger players. I think I'll stop for now, just because I've been talking forever. I hope that a lot of you have less questions now about what you should probably put into your starter guns. And let me know in the comments below if you have any questions about a lot of these parts, anything specific that you want to look up or want my opinion on. I am an airsoft tech, so I build pretty much all of my guns. I only have a few that are stock, really, and even then I've changed their barrels and motors and stuff like this, just with more expensive parts than what I'd advise for any intro person. So let me know if you still enjoy this series, and I'll talk to you soon.